Hello, and welcome to our session on digital accessibility for university stakeholders. We'd like to thank the conference for having us. We're very excited to be here and share information with all of you. My name is Jennifer Segalin. I am the Director of Strategic Partnerships, and I'm joined by Taylor Snook, who is our Senior Accessibility Consultant. We're with Perkins Access, the accessibility consulting division of Perkins School for the Blind. Today, we will be sharing our experiences from the front lines of accessibility and the work we've done with colleges and universities around the country. We'll start today by introducing ourselves and some of the work being done at Perkins School for the Blind and in Perkins Access to ensure that every student has access to a full education through the growing ecosystem of digital information, services, and technologies that are in use and rolling out every day to educate students and connect everyone across the university. Taylor will give us a high-level primer on digital accessibility and share some statistics and user benefits. And for the rest of the session, we've prepared a number of questions, and we will use those to guide a dialogue around some important topics that we feel are relevant to all the various departments and everyone across a university. We'll move to the next slide. On the screen, the description of Perkins Access and an image of myself and Taylor. I am as I said, I lead the strategic partnerships for Perkins Access. My career started shortly after the ADA was passed in 1990. I started working in the area of closed captioning and audio description, but most of my career has been spent connecting organizations with accessibility experts to provide guidance for important technical advancements, including the introduction of VoiceOver into the Apple operating system. Today in Perkins Access, I continue to connect organizations with world-class accessibility consultants. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Taylor.
Hi, everyone. So happy to be here today. Thanks for having me. As Jennifer mentioned, I'm a senior digital accessibility consultant at Perkins Access. I've been working at Perkins School for the Blind for about 8 years now, and I've been with Perkins Access since its infancy. And I particularly specialize in working with higher ed institutions. I've worked with a very wide range of universities, all different sizes, and really have engaged with them at a variety of stages, whether they're just starting to form an accessibility committee, or they are looking for ongoing support and efforts with testing their platforms or conducting annual trainings and things like that.
Great. Move to the next slide. We have an aerial view of the Perkins School for the Blind campus in Watertown, Massachusetts, with the Boston skyline in the background and the Charles River snaking through the picture. Perkins School for the Blind has been working to make the world accessible for more than 190 years. Perkins Access is the digital accessibility consulting division, and our expertise is combined with the firsthand experience and best practices from across our entire organization, the first school for the blind in the US. Perkins Access works with organizations around the world. Our approach is really driven by a few key goals. One is to bring a user-centered approach to all of the work we do with organizations. So working with our colleagues across Perkins, we bring that experience and perspective to our guidance to these organizations. We're mission-driven. Our organization as a consulting division is working with industries from education to healthcare and finance. But all of the work we're doing is really to support and make the world more accessible. And the work we're doing goes and supports the work and mission of Perkins School for the Blind. And lastly, we're very strategy focused. We work with organizations to ensure that they're building accessibility into all the work they're doing so that there is practices and procedures in place to ensure that every project and every solution for students and providing for patients, everything is accessible from now and going forward. Move to the next slide. I'm going to hand things off to Taylor to give us a high-level description, just a background a little bit on digital accessibility for those in the audience that may not be familiar with sort of all the topics we'll be covering today. So I'll hand it off, Taylor.
Great, thanks. So what do we mean by digital accessibility is really making sure that websites, tools, technologies are all designed and developed so that people with disabilities can use them, and really a better, more inclusive experience for all users. And digital materials are, all types, and I'll take all types of forms, and making sure that they're usable by as many people as possible. So this includes, we often think of websites and web content when we're talking about digital accessibility, but this also includes applications, mobile applications, smart devices, Alexa, Siri, all of those things, and all sorts of emerging new technologies. It also includes all multimedia, so videos, audio, and then of course PDFs, Word documents, PowerPoints. Everything needs to be made and designed with accessibility in mind. So I always, every person I've ever met at some point has created a Word document. So really everyone plays a role, no matter what, in making sure that digital content is accessible. So I'm going to dive into some numbers for a little bit. So on the slide, I'm showing here that 1 in 4, and that represents according to a study done by the CDC in 2018, approximately 1 in 4 adults in the United States self-reported having some form of disability. This number is typically pretty shocking to a lot of people, and I think what people don't realize is how many people have a disability that might not be perceivable. One example I give is approximately 1 in 12 men in the United States has some form of color blindness. So you likely know individuals who have color blindness, and you may or may not realize it. There's also this number, I want to mention that what this number does not include is things that we've referred to as temporary disabilities or situational disabilities. So an easy example of a temporary disability might be someone who has injured their arm or broken their arm and is limited to the use of one hand. A similar situational disability might be someone who's a new parent and is holding a sleeping child and trying to check their email on their phone, or pushing a stroller and trying to follow directions. So those are situational disabilities. So again, it's something where someone's limited in how they're using something. And when we talk about digital accessibility, we're talking about making things easier for all users. I want to talk a bit about sort of the 4 main categories of disability, and a little bit about the population of those groups. So one of those categories is visual disabilities. So that obviously includes blindness. It includes low vision. It can also include things like cataracts and glaucoma. Obviously, at Perkins School for the Blind, we're very familiar with this, and a lot of times people, when they think about digital accessibility, they think a lot about blindness and screen reader use, but I really want to emphasize that digital accessibility is really about all 4 of these categories, and the guidelines and standards that I'll talk a little bit about cover all of these. So in terms of population, there's approximately 20 million people in the US that have some form of visual impairment. So that's approximately the population of the entire state of New York. For auditory disabilities, which can range from deafness, it includes individuals who are deaf-blind, those who are hard of hearing. That's approximately 16 million people, which is close to the population of all of New England. Cognitive disabilities, so, learning disabilities, memory impairments, individuals who suffer from seizures, individuals who are dyslexic would all fall into that category, which is approximately 34 million individuals, which is close to the population of the entire state of Texas. And then our largest population is individuals with motor impairments. So that can range from, include amputees, people with paralysis, muscular dystrophy. It could be individuals who have arthritis or chronic pain and it limits their ability to use their hands. So that's the largest group of these 4 categories, and that's approximately 40 million individuals, which is close to the population of the entire state of California. So I just, I know I'm sort of geeking out on the numbers here, but really I'm just trying to emphasize, how large this population of users is. And then but circling back to the importance of digital accessibility and how it benefits all users, and some sort of easy, tangible things that I think we can all relate to benefiting from include things like video captions, closed captioning on television, transcripts. This is something that is particularly in higher ed so important, and there's been studies about how many students use and benefit from closed captions. This is also something incredibly beneficial for individuals whose English is not their first language, or users who have learning disabilities. It can be very beneficial to have captions and to have that auditory feedback as they're watching media. Good contrast, so making sure that things are easy to read, and that if you're reading text, that the text color has a significant contrast with the background color. Responsive design, so a lot of, in the most recent version of the standards, a lot of them now cover reflow, which is basically for users who like to enlarge text or zoom in on content, and that also sort of goes hand in hand with how things reflow and adapt when users are looking at content on a mobile device. So again, another example where following the accessibility guidelines is also going to be beneficial for really your users who are on mobile, which I think is pretty much everyone at this stage. Using clear and concise language, again, just beneficial for all your users. They don't have to think as hard. Like individuals with English is not their first language, things like that. I already talked about, all the users who have temporary disabilities or situational disabilities benefiting from more accessible, inclusive design. And then sort of not necessarily about your users, but if you're involved in marketing and communications and things like that, one thing that's good to know is I'd add that having accessible content can really improve SEO, search engine optimization. So obviously that's very important to your strategy. So just one additional benefit to accessible content. Oops. So what I'm showing on the slide here is just a number of silos on a farm. And I think this is a good analogy because really every organization we work for, organizations I've worked for, they always tend to have or operate in silos. But what I've found with working with higher ed institutions is this is exponentially more complicated because there's so many individual colleges or programs or degrees and departments. And so a big part of the work that Perkins Access does and the work that I do is breaking down these silos when it comes to establishing an accessibility strategy across your organization. And I will pass it back to Jennifer to dive into that a little bit more.
Great, thank you. So on the screen, we have a list of most of the key departments that are across a university, and we'll be describing each of these shortly. Perkins Access is very involved in guiding these departments, and these are really considered the key stakeholders across a university. We drive accessibility strategy for an entire organization and help them to support sort of those immediate needs, but also thinking about a long-term accessibility strategy. Responsibility for accessibility at universities often falls on a relatively small team of experts. And because the number of digital properties and projects within an organization are so extensive, it's very hard for small teams to provide the necessary support, particularly around testing for accessibility, providing guidance on implementing accessibility techniques and solutions. In order for these organizations to be successful in scaling these accessibility programs, they need to distribute the responsibilities for accessibility across all the various roles. Perkins Access is providing guidance to address these challenges, and Taylor is leading many of these projects for our organization. Taylor often talks to me about how much she loves working with our university partners, so I'd love to ask you, Taylor, kind of why is that?
Yeah, that's a good question, especially since I was just showing the silo slide and how complicated it can be. I definitely like the challenge, but and I think I enjoy really connecting the dots and between all the various departments and colleges, and it gives me an opportunity to introduce more people to accessibility, a lot of people that might not be familiar with it at all. And it's so exciting to see how people react. Most people react with, enthusiasm, and that's really the best. But I guess what I really say is that why I love working with higher ed institutions comes from the fact that I work at Perkins School for the Blind. I normally, pre-pandemic, I would be on campus every day. I would be seeing the students. Students on our campus have a cafe that they run, and I love going and getting lunch and interacting with them. And our students are so bright and have so much potential. And the mission of Perkins is to make sure that we're preparing our students for the world, and Perkins Access is preparing the world for our students, and a big part of that is making sure that they can continue on to college. And so I think that's really why I love working with higher ed institutions, because I want to make sure that the students that I'm working with or interacting with have those opportunities, because I can see how much potential they have. And then I guess one last thing I would say is sort of tying back to that enthusiasm. When I work with different departments, there's usually a couple people that I call the accessibility champions, and those are people that, whether they've been doing this for a while or pushing this for a while or just learning about it, are just very enthusiastic and excited to do the work. And that's just so motivating to me, because I know that, I'm not always going to be there to champion this, and that they are going to keep this and keep it moving forward. And a lot of those individuals, I think, tend to have a personal connection. They know someone with a disability, and it makes them more passionate about this, but not necessarily. So I would say students first, and then second, just engaging and working with people that really have a passion about this.
Great. So those accessibility champions across the university, I think they help to lead everyone, that is playing a part in accessibility and making sure that information is accessible. I would really like to dig in and talk about some of the departments specifically that play the critical role across the university as they address accessibility. So kind of going back to the image on the screen, some of those departments are admissions, IT, marketing and communications, career services, human resources and diversity and inclusion, disability services, student affairs, procurement, libraries, university advancement, and alumni groups. So that's a quite a long list. I'm hoping that we can get to every department. But I think, I'd like to start with procurement. This is a department that really connects with all of the other departments in the organization. And there's some very specific accessibility activities that are part of procurement. So when we look at digital information across a college or university website, the sources of content and the platforms for distributing the content are countless. What are some of the ways that procurement teams can begin to drive accessibility across the whole organization?
Yeah, great question. I'm going to stop the screen share, so since we're moving into more of the dialogue piece, I would say, yeah, procurement is, the importance of procurement can't be understated. I'd say when I first meet with a university, and particularly someone that is involved in procurement, I always ask them, how a big part of it is policy. So I ask, how are they incorporating accessibility into their procurement process and their procurement policy? And also a big part of that is, are their faculty and staff aware of their policy? How are they being informed? How are they being updated when the policy evolves or changes? And that has significant benefits, not only for the procurement people, but when staff know about this and are well informed, they can start asking the important questions when they start seeking out a vendor or a third party platform. So it allows them to be proactive and probably help them get on a good side with the procurement team when they're coming to them with something that they've already dove into the accessibility of the platform. And so it's not falling on the procurement people to go back to them and say, hey, I know you love this shiny object, but this is not going to work because it's not accessible.
Great. So Perkins Access works with universities, but also with vendors that are providing the technologies and solutions for universities. And we help our sort of the vendor clients to build accessibility into their products and services to meet those university requirements. What are the types of questions that procurement should be asking a vendor to find out whether or not they're taking sort of those right steps?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I would say that this goes for both like future vendors that you're going to be looking to work with, as well as current vendors, because you're not always in a situation to go out and look for something new. You have a contract, you're using a platform, and now everyone's familiar with it. So there's also opportunities for you to reach out to those that you're already working with and contracting with to ask them about accessibility. So in both cases, I would ask some very specific questions. I would ask them, do they have an accessibility statement? That's, sort of the basic thing that they should have. And ideally they have a statement that's publicly available on their website. So they're just a way of them really demonstrating their commitment. You also want to ask them if they are conducting any sort of audits or assessments of their platform. And one thing you can ask for is something called a VPAT, which stands for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, which essentially it's based off of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which I won't get into too much, but those are really sort of the rules for making your content, the check marks and things for making your content accessible. So I think of a VPAT as sort of a report card for a website or platform. And one thing I would say when you're asking this question is also to ask who is conducting the assessments and who completed the VPAT. The analogy I like to use is if your child brings home a report card that they completed themselves, it's probably not going to carry as much weight as a report card that's coming from their teachers. So while it's not that, it's not wrong for them to be doing their own VPATs and conducting their own assessments, ideally they have someone else looking at their tool. Another huge question to ask is, are they testing with native users of assistive technology? So, native screen reader users, individuals who are deaf, individuals who have motor impairments. This is something Jennifer talked about at the beginning. It's just really sort of critical to our approach to digital accessibility. We are one of those third parties that do VPATs, that conduct assessments and audits, and we're the teachers, I guess, in that scenario. But we also conduct usability testing. So I work with some of my colleagues, we have some volunteers, and we'll do user testing where we ask them to go through common use cases. So that could be, logging into your student portal to find out your course schedule. And we watch how the user tries to complete that task and document what kind of barriers they run into. So that's a key thing to be looking for. And then I want to really emphasize that there's no such, well, in my opinion, there's really no such thing as 100% compliance or a perfect VPAT. And if that's something that a vendor is giving to you, that is sort of a red flag to me, because while we want to be as accessible as possible, sometimes it's hard to get it to that perfect level. So I would rather see a VPAT that documents current issues with the platform, because then I know that it gives legitimacy to it. And then, and this brings me to sort of the last question I would always be asking the third party is, what is your remediation process for fixing issues? And specifically, what is your timeline for working through those? And how are you continuing to improve and build accessibility into your tool?
Right, that sustainability piece.
Mm-hmm.
Staying on the technology topic for just a little bit longer, let's talk about some of the things that IT departments are responsible for related to digital accessibility, and how they can be making decisions that will support the rest of the organization. Let's start with procurement and delivery of tools for faculty, staff, and students.
Yeah, so you want to, obviously IT departments are very much involved in, procuring laptops and hardware for individuals throughout the campus, as well as software, SaaS SaaS, software as a service, and so you want to be thinking about accessibility in all of those things. I recently got a new laptop, and for whatever reason, in the latest version of this laptop, they removed the insert key. Most people probably don't use the insert key, but I use it. It's a common key to use for screen reader commands, and it's probably commonly used because it's not used that often, so users don't have to worry about it conflicting with other shortcuts. So there's certain things like that that it's important for IT to be knowledgeable about assistive technology, assistive software, hardware devices, and be able to support students, faculty, staff with their accessibility needs. And if they can't support it, have a place or someone to go to that can provide that support.
And what about web-based information that's being supported by IT?
Yeah, so a lot of the IT departments I've worked with are very involved in setting up content management systems, CMSs on campuses, as well as, you know, whatever the main learning management system is for the school. So it's important that those things are built with accessibility in mind. They're coded according to the accessibility standards. And particularly with, you know, content authoring systems, there's ways to set those up that encourage and support content authors in creating accessible content. I would also say they're often involved in managing, setting up HR portals, or, you know, helping with creating forms and applications, and really all of those things. It's critical that they're coded according to the accessibility standards.
And that's so important today with so many of the COVID forms and kind of all of those new applications that are coming out. And also, you know, IT is supporting media services. Maybe just touch on that.
Yeah, so I think a lot of larger, especially larger universities that we work with, have their own media services departments, or it's kind of rolled into IT. And you want to make sure that you have captions available for all of your video content. So that might mean live captioning, providing captions during a lecture, providing captions during a commencement ceremony, or it could also mean adding captions to pre-recorded content. There's also audio description, which I won't get into too much, but audio description is in some ways captions for people who are visually impaired is how I would describe it. And that is, it provides description of non-dialogue content that's happening on screen. So if you're watching a show and you close your eyes, or you're in the other room, you might hear dialogue, but then you might hear, you know, a lot of blank space and a bunch of laughing. And if you don't know, you can't see the screen, you don't know what's happening. So that's sort of where audio description comes in. And then transcripts are huge. So, I mean, if you already have a captioning file, then really you already have a transcript, and adding that to wherever you're publishing or posting videos is helpful. Again, for individuals, you know, with learning disabilities, there's been studies that a lot of students will use transcripts to create study guides. If a video is very long, it can help you can search a transcript and locate where you want to go in that video to find out what you're looking for. So
There's so many.
Media, yeah, there's a lot there. It's one of our popular trainings that we provide, you know, accessible multimedia, because it really is, it's so important, but it's also, you know, there's a lot to discuss there.
And certainly with captions, you know, we know that so many students benefit, you know, not just someone who needs that that information. So critical. So we're going to move on to the marketing and communications group. A lot to dig into here. Marketing and communications, they're often responsible for creating and maintaining that consistent brand for a college or university. How does this create an opportunity for digital accessibility?
Yeah, I think you touched on something important there, and the consistency with the brand, but really that has sort of ripple benefits for in terms of accessibility, and that sort of comes in, especially with, I would say, styling. So you want consistent styling, and that sort of goes back to making sure you're creating accessible color palettes. Contrast is a huge piece of making content accessible. So while you probably already have your school colors, but your color palette probably has some extra things built into that. So you want to make sure that you have colors available that have good contrast. So you have a bunch of colors that fall on the darker end of the spectrum and several that fall on the lighter end of the spectrum. If you have a lot of colors that all sort of fall in between white and black, you're going to have a hard time. You're really going to be limiting yourself into what colors you can use and still meet the standards. Also, I would talk about like content management systems again, and just your main domain for your university. So I've worked with universities where different colleges and departments all had their own domain and website, and that can be challenging. And recently I worked with a school that a really large university, and all the departments except for I think 2 were all on the main CMS. So that was a win for me. And the reason that's beneficial is when you create accessible templates, the same way, when you create an accessible color palette, you're able to create one thing that's accessible that can be repeated over and over again. And you also have the opportunity to provide really a single customized training on for your content authors on how to make the content accessible in that CMS, as well as the templates that you've created for them. And I'd go into a little bit more detail here in that if you have a manual or a guide for how users are creating content, which is you probably already have, which content blocks or templates to use for which type of content, how to insert images, how to embed media. And when you have a reference guide like that, you really want to add into that accessibility tips and kind of accessibility checkpoints, I would say. You want to avoid having a separate guide for accessibility, because a lot of people aren't going to look at that. They want to add an image, they look up the instructions, they do it. They're not going to look at the accessibility guide. But if you have that section on this is how you insert an image and position it to the left, and then you have a checkpoint that says, hey, did you add alternative text for this image, or did you mark it as decorative? I can't get into images is like easily a 2-hour conversation, but depending on how the image is, what function it performs changes how you treat the alternative text. So I would just say the more, when everyone's working on the same page, it makes things a lot easier. And I'll just add one more example where I had a university where their department actually chose to sort of leave the main domain, and basically they said, that's fine, but that means you're taking on the responsibility of making sure your new site is accessible. And what's great is we were able to work with them from the design point on, which is huge when we can be involved early. But it's still, I think in the end, they realized that, they were taking on a lot of extra work because they had to really, instead of using templates that were accessible, they had to create new templates and new designs and all of those things and make sure accessibility was incorporated in those, where really that sort of work had already been done for them if they went with the main CMS.
Sounds like marketing and communications can have a huge impact across the university. So I'm going to move into sort of the development groups, university advancement, alumni relations. In an April survey, a Fidelity charity study found that 54% of donors indicated that they will maintain their level of charitable giving this year, and another 25% intend to increase their giving. What are some steps that advancement and fundraising departments, we know that's so critical right now, can take to ensure that donors aren't facing any barriers to giving to their alma mater or to universities with research departments, sort of all of the giving that's happening?
Yeah, I would say there's two main pieces to this, and one being the communication side, and one being the financial transactions side of things. So first, with communications, you want to make sure that whatever you're sending out, however you're engaging with your alumni, your donors, that it's accessible. So that includes emails, newsletters, social media posts. When you're embedding text in images, that's not accessible. So you need to either avoid that or provide an accessible alternative. And that might simply be putting the same text in the tweet or Facebook post. It also includes, mailing. I mean, we're talking about digital accessibility today, but making sure that your mailings are easy to read and have good contrast. And I wouldn't tell your donors this, but your population of alumni and donors is aging, and with age come disabilities. Your vision decreases, vision loss, your motor impairments, hearing. All of these things are things we have to look forward to as we age. So that's something to consider with your alumni and donors. And then the second piece being the financial transaction piece. So you want to make sure you can get people's money. And there's usually, with development departments, we see they're using a third-party tool to gather donations. That's sort of to be expected. They're not going to build a credit card processing system themselves. And so again, this comes back to, we'll keep coming back to that procurement piece and making sure that you are using a tool, a plugin that's accessible. And forms can be major barriers for users of assistive technology when they're not coded correctly. So they might, if fields aren't labeled, or it could be a lot of things. And you also want to think, when someone's giving money, they want to make sure that they're doing it right. And so I've worked with screen reader users recently on a site for a donation, and she was like, it's not really clear to me how much money I'm donating. She selected a button that she thought was $20, but so, I mean, that's huge. That's very important. So,
right. So the form is where someone's putting in their name and their information and their address, so that they can complete that information and select the dollar amount.
Yep.
Okay, great.
And there's also, this is important, I'm going to geek out real quick, but there's an important thing that you put in the code to identify that there's like a universal identifier for first name fields, last name, address. And you've probably seen in your browser, you might click on a form, you might click in the first name field and something pops up that allows you to auto-populate all of that content. That's hugely beneficial for users. And really, it's just a simple thing that needs to be added to the code. So again, it all comes back to making sure your vendors and the tools that you're using are following the guidelines.
Great. I heard a recent NPR story, so we're going to start moving into admissions and enrollment. And we're hearing a lot about this in the news today. The story was from August, and it talked about how universities are adding new features to their admission process, and including apps that are using sort of one of the examples was a sort of impromptu question during the interview process. And the question was posed to the prospective student, and they needed to answer on the spot, and there was a video recording of their response. In a time, we know universities are, they have a strong interest in diversity and in a very interesting student body. Are these innovations in some cases necessary changes given our time? But are these changes to the admission process impacting students with disabilities?
Yeah, and I would say there's pros and cons to sort of some of these new things, but even actually, I think 2 years ago, I was working with a university and testing their graduate application software. And, actually, I mean, this sort of goes for everything. Uploading documents, you're probably, at some point, you're going to be uploading your, I don't know, your, oh my gosh, your essay or some grade scores or something. And this application, the upload button wasn't accessible, or something. There's opportunities, I think, as you mentioned, to do video recordings and things like that. So it's one more thing that it's critical that it's accessible, and this, everything's important to test with native users of accessibility of assistive technology, and this is certainly one of those, because you also want to think students might not want to disclose the fact that they have a disability when they're applying for school or a job for that matter. And if you have a barrier in your system, you might be basically forcing that individual to seek help and disclose why they're having that barrier. And so you're really taking that decision on whether or not to disclose that away from that individual, which is obviously not fair. So make sure those things are accessible, and then at a minimum, make sure that if users have run into challenges with the application process, or they need an accommodation, there's a way for them to do that without maybe contacting someone outside of the admissions process, or make sure that they can be confident that this is not something that's going to hinder. I mean, obviously it's illegal to discriminate, but there's bias. So that's something to think about.
Great. We have so many departments to cover and just not enough time. So I want to just touch very quickly on a few of the remaining departments and some of the questions, just to see if we can briefly touch on them, and then hopefully leave just a couple minutes for questions. So all of these are equally important. Student affairs. The student affairs groups today are clearly focused on reopening plans, but their roles cover everything from student communications, health services, housing, dining, athletics, and we're really talking about touching so many students across the organization. Can you just do a general recommendation?
Yeah, I mean, again, this comes back to third parties, making sure that the tools that you're acquiring are accessible. And then, I'll just stop there because of time, but I want to add that communications are so important right now, and there's obviously you want to get information out in as many forms as possible. So text messages, social media, emails, modal alerts, banner alerts on your websites. And so you want to make sure that all of those things are created and with accessibility in mind.
Great. Quickly on libraries, we've done some interesting projects recently. Maybe you could just touch on one quickly. I know there's content and training and so many different elements of library, systems. Just a brief kind of
Yeah.
story.
I mean, libraries are like a host of digital content. So, one university over the summer, we did a lot of work with their library staff, and that included making sure that staff is trained on how to make PDFs accessible, because so much of their content is in PDF format. There's a lot of legacy I mean, it's not realistic to convert every document in the system to an accessible document, but having a process, things that are accessed a lot, making sure that those are accessible, and then having a way for students to request an accessible format of that document. So it's important to remember that when you scan a piece of paper into your computer and put it in a PDF, it's not accessible. You have to do additional tagging, and that's where we really get into the training that we provide, and that includes, accessible documents, and then we get into media a lot too.
Great. So today it's so critical, and for our conference attendees, human resources, diversity and inclusion, post-graduation, career services, employment is, and it goes without saying, so critical. Less than half of Americans with a visual impairment participate in the workforce. And of those that do, the unemployment rate is twice the rate of those without a disability. Most job seekers don't even make it to the interview process. And Perkins is working on programs. I know there'll be at the conference some opportunities to learn about some of those programs for supporting individuals as they enter the workforce. But can you just talk on this topic around that's so important to students and to staff and administration?
Yeah, certainly, and I'm glad you brought up the statistics, because they really are drastic. So I know you mentioned HR and career services. So I'll start with career services. So students typically are going to college with the end goal of getting a job, and that's obviously why career services is so important on a campus. So making sure that however students are, whatever platform they're using to post resumes and network, if you're using a tool for arranging interviews with potential companies, all of those things, making sure your materials are available. If students are pursuing, graduate school or need additional testing like LSATs and things like that, making sure that they're supported and that stuff is all accessible. Yeah, so it's so important. And then the same, I think I may have mentioned this a little bit earlier, but with HR, I mean, the same way when a student is applying for university, or whether someone's applying to your university for a job, it's critical that they can find your career pages. I've worked with universities where users couldn't find a list of job opportunities on their site. That's huge. I recommend having that in the footer of your page, I would say. And then of course, making sure that the application tool is accessible, and that you can provide accommodations for interviews as needed if someone needs a sign language interpreter, or if someone needs help making sure that they can set up a video conference. And I would add that one, to look at COVID and to try to find some things in the glass half full of this nightmare is, a lot of companies and schools really hesitated for a long time to go online and remote. And a lot of people in the disability community really were pushing for that, because whether for mobility impairments, difficulty with transportation, and for whatever reason, they were not successful in convincing employers that they could be equally productive and successful from home. And COVID has really sort of pushed that. And I think a lot of companies are going to stay virtual. And I think that will create more opportunities for individuals. At least I hope that it creates more opportunities for individuals with disabilities to obtain an employment.
Great. Certainly Disability Services is, a group that supports every department and student needs. So they're just an incredibly important group, and it's important to ensure that all departments are utilizing the expertise of these groups. Thank you, Taylor, so much for sharing your expertise with us. Working with universities is exciting and really part of our mission at Perkins Access to support access for students and in education. We are in a new world today, for sure, and universities are facing so many new challenges, but it feels like we have a really incredible opportunity to push for inclusive solutions and technology to build digital accessibility into every new website, every new mobile application and experience. I hope our session has provided some new information and some guidance to help you bring accessibility to every conversation and be an accessibility champion for your organization. Thank you so much.